Home by 6 p.m. Okay, good evening. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara Daf Lamed Vav, and we're starting about 12 to 15 lines from the bottom of the page on Lamed Hey Amud Beis, 4 lines into the wide lines at the 2 dots. The Hapas, and we'll be speaking about the bread made by an akum, bread that's made by a goy. Just to be clear, that's a lot of the brands that we buy. If you buy the Jewel brand of bread with a hechsher on it, it's still pas akum. Right? That's still not bread that's made by a yid. So we're gonna see how that plays out a little bit in our Gemara today. Let us jump right in. Amar of Kahana, Amar of Yochanan, Pas lo hutra bebezdin. Pas was not the concern about pas was not removed in bezdin. So says the Gemara, Michlal, the way you're talking, the ikaman deshari, that there is someone who doesn't have a problem with pas akum, as long as you know the ingredients are good, the Jewel brand of bread, whatever it is. Should be mutter. Says the Gemara, you're 100% correct. That's a good deal. Amar, Pamachas Yatza Rebbe Lesada, Behavi Ovid Kochavim Lefanov, and a non-Jew brought in front of Rebbe, Pas Purne Ma'afasa. He brought him this bread, which is a certain type of bread. Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, says it's bread that's made in a unique large oven that has a door on the side. Most of them had their opening on the tops, but this one had a door on the side. So whatever the case may be, and it was ma'afasa. It was a massive piece of bread. It was the size of a saw, which is for bread. That's very big. So it actually is the equivalent of 140 eggs, according to the math over here. Amar Rebbe, what did Rebbe say with this pas akum that was brought in front of him? Kama noa pazu ma rocha chamim laosra. Why would the rabbis ever say it's usher? So the Gemara says, what kind of comment is that, Rebbe? Ma rocha chamim mishum chasnus. That's all of our concern, is that we're going to get too close to the akum, and he's going to have a daughter who might be the right age and might be cute, and all of a sudden you're dating a guy. So says the Gemara, no, that's not what Rebbe meant. What Rebbe meant was Ela ma rocha chamim leosra basode. Remember where Rebbe met this guy in the field. The concerns of chasna should be true when you're in the neighborhood. It's your neighbor who's a guy. You see them every day. That's where chasnas is a concern. But if you're out in a cornfield in southern Illinois and a guy brings you bread, that should be mutter. So Rebbe was trying to figure out. I understand in the city why it's a problem, but out in the field it should be mutter to have pas akum. Says the Gemara, Kasvur ha'am hitir Rebbe hapas, and the people thought that Rebbe was matir bread to say that there is no concern about bread anymore in the field. The lohi Rebbe lohi tiras hapas. In fact, that was not true. He was just talking and learning. He didn't paskin anything. Rabbi Yosef, Itema Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Amar lo kacha yamaisa. That's not correct. That's not really what happened. Really, the story with Rebbe was like this. Ela Amru, Pam Achas Halach Rebbe Lemakom Echad. He went to a particular place, V'ra Pas Dachuk B'Talmidim, and he saw that the bread was very difficult for the students, meaning there wasn't a lot of bread. Amar Rebbe. Rebbe said, Ein kan palter. There's no bakers. No one can make bread. So says the Gemara, what did people infer from Rebbe's comment of Ein kan palter, his rhetorical question? The Gemara says, Kasur nam lomar palter ove kochavim. They made an incorrect assumption. He wasn't being matir pasakum. Pasakum is the real deal. Again, we're not so makpid on it because we don't really have concerns about chasnus when we buy a store brand of bread. We don't meet anybody. We don't know who the owners are. We don't know who their daughters are. There's no chasnus when you go to Jewel and buy a hechshered pasakum, which is why halachically we're not so deeply concerned about it. Anyways, Amar Bichalbo, Afilu Lamando Amar Palter Ove Kochavim, even according to those who say that when Rebbe saw the Pas Dachok Talmidim, when he saw that the Talmidim didn't have a lot of bread, that he was talking about an Ove Kochavim, Lo Amran Ela Deleka Palter Yisrael. That's only going to be allowed if there is no Jewish bread. Abal B'makom Deika Palter Yisrael. If there is a Jewish baker, then you should not buy Pas Akum. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Afilu Lamad Amar Paltar Oved Kochav Mahani Mili Besade Aval Be'ir Lo Mishum Chasnos. And if you want to be lenient, then you can be lenient only in the Sada, like Rabbi tried to say. Aval Be'ir Lo, you're not allowed to Mishum Chasnos. So this is where it's quoted in Shulchan Aruch. This Gemara over here is quoted. Let's just get the right mind. Malkum Tur Shulchan Aruch Yerodei Sim and Kuf Yud Beis Sif Beis around some of the halachos of Pas Palter Pas Akum. Says the Gemara, Amar, Ivo, Haba Menachis v'achel pas abe mitzvah. He was eating, literally biting. He was eating bread on the border. Rashi says abe mitzvah besados shel etzel ha mitzarim. The fields next to the borders. Amar lehu Rabba. Rabba says to them in the base medrash, Vitem Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Lo tishta'u ta'ayvu. No one should listen to Ayvu. Why not? De ka'achil lachmei da'armai. Because he's eating the bread of an Armenian. So obviously the Gemara is pretty stark about this. So ask your local Orthodox rabbi. It is a prevalent reality where we live that many people do eat pas akum because the concerned pas palter. What's that? Right, right. Also, pas akum has such a negative schmeck to it, but yeah. So that's by and large, people are pretty lenient about it. Not everybody, of course, and of course during a Seres Tshuva, it's appropriate to try and add that chumrah according to the Ramah.
The company is a faceless organization. If there was a bakery that sold bread, right, the stomach, that would be an issue.
A hechshered bread?
Yeah.
So let's say it's owned by non-Jews.
Yeah.
But it has a CRC on the door.
Well, no, that's a company, right? That's the faceless company. I'm saying
It's Pas Yisrael?
Somehow or another. I don't know if you may have turned the oven like Bishop. I'm not sure what. The Jewel Bakery.
No, it was Dunkin' Donuts we're talking about.
I'm saying Vincenzo, the nice Italian guy who makes good bread and opened up a store on Tui and got a hechsher, right? And this Italian
Why is that worse than going to Jewel and buying
well, because the entire concern is, fastness.
Right.
There's no concern about that.
Making bread, buying and walking out.
I wouldn't have made that. I wouldn't have made the distinction.
He had like one in his house and
Right. That right. If he does one of those like home, one of those companies that like that's impossible. That's impossible. It's hard enough to get it for a yid. So okay. Let's talk about the Hashemen Shalahen, the bottom line of Lamed Hamid Beis, talking about oil. Is there any gzera around the Shemen Shal Akum? Shemen, says the Gemara, Rav Amar Daniel the Navi, Daniel Gazar Alaf, Shmuel Amar. Shmuel says, no, the concern by oil is Zlifasan Shel Kelim Tmein O Sartan, not Asurim, but Tmein. We're concerned about Tuma, that the Zlifasan, which is basically the blios that come out of the Kelim, and if it's Tameh, so then there's a transference of Tuma to whatever else you're touching, and therefore it's Aser, so it's a Tuma concern. Says the Gemara, what is it? The times of the Beis HaMikdash, who's concerned about Tuma nowadays? Atu kule alma ochlu taros ninu. Everybody's so stark that they only eat food betara. What is this weird concern about Tuma? It's post-Churban. No one's concerned about that kind of stuff anymore. In the early times of the Amoraim, just post-Churban, we know that the Chachamim were pretty careful about that for a while, but it didn't last till now, that's for sure. So says the Gemara, no, we didn't mean about food that's tamei, elaz lifasan shel kelim asurin osartan. What we're concerned about the oil is that the food the blios that will come out of the oil container or the oil itself might be itself asur to eat. Again, not tamei, but asur. Amar le Shmuel le Rav. Shmuel says to Rav, let's get the shitos clear. Shmuel was the one who said it was about the Isser, and Rav was the one who said it was about a gzera from Daniel. So says Amar le Shmuel Rav, Bishlam aladidi de amina, that I say zlifasan shel kelim osrin osartan, that I'm concerned about the blios of the shemen. Hainu dechi asa Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. That this aligns with the following Mari Makom. The Amar Darish Rav Simloi ben Nitzivin. Rav Simloi, who we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute, he made a drasha in Nitzivin. Shemen, Reb Yehuda, and it says over here Hanasi, and according to others, it's Reb Yehuda Nisiya. A lot of these Reb Yehuda Nisiya, we'll see that the names don't really stem historically if it's Reb Yehuda Hanasi. So Reb Yehuda Nisiya ubeis dino nimnu Allah v'hitiruhu. So then it makes sense that we could have a scenario if you hold like Shmuel, who says that there was a gzeira derabanan because of kelim asurim, because of the zlifasan shel kelim asurim, then I can understand how the bezdin of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would come along and be matir. Kasavar, what do they hold? No saying tam lifgam mutter, that once the blios of a food, are in the category of nosein tam lifgam, that the blios no longer have a positive flavor, but rather they have a negative flavor, then it's mutter to eat that food. We rely on this heter all the time, this shita of nosein tam lifgam. So let's talk out an example. I make boiling hot macaroni and cheese, noodles, everything on the stove. It's 200 degrees. It's no question there are blios in the pot. No question. If I then make something fleshik an hour later after washing out the pot, we assume that the blios that were in the walls are nosein tam l'shvach, that the cheese flavor that's absorbed in the wall is positive, and therefore it's an addition, and therefore we then need bittul in order to eat it. So you need 60 times the size of the pot. Masha ein kain, if something is an eino ben yomo, if I made the macaroni at 10 a.m., I finished making it at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, and now it's 10:01 a.m. on a Wednesday. So then, whatever blios will come out of the walls of the pot are nosein tam lifgam. We rely on this shita categorically. So perhaps, says the Gemara, that because Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his bezdin held of the principle of nosein tam lifgam is mutter, so therefore Shmuel argues against Rav. My shita makes more sense. We had a concern about the blios, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasi holds that the blios are mutter as long as they're nosein tam lifgam. Good to go. That makes perfect sense. Ella, says Shmuel to Rav, about a third of the way down, a quarter of the way down, Alamed Vav Alf. Ella lididach, according to you, Rav, who hold to Amris that the Isser of Shemen by an Akum is that Daniel Gazar Alav, Daniel Gazar ve'aser Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi Mavatele. That doesn't work. That doesn't make sense that you could have a Rav remove something from a Dayan. After all, V'atnan, ein bezdin yachol levatel divrei bezdin chavero, ela im kein gadol hemenu b'chachmu v'minyan. So because of this principle, and this was like a stopgap measure from making sure rabbis don't run away with halacha and make up their own stuff, which segments of our community do. They totally are off the rails and they mamish make up Torah. So then if that's the case, we have this stopgap measure. So then there's no way that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi could undo Daniel. Daniel was part of a bezin that was gadol b'chachma v'minyan, pashut. So therefore, it must be, says Shmuel, that I'm right, that really the gzera was a gzera derabanan about tuma, about iser, about zlifas and shel kelim asur. And it has to be that Rav is wrong. Can't be from Daniel. So says the Gemara, what does Rav say back to Shmuel? This is very unique. We don't always see them talking to each other. Amar Lei says back to him, Simloi luda'a ka'amris. You're talking about Simloi, the guy from Lud, that guy? Shiny ludoi, de mizalzalu. He was mizalzal talmidei chachamim. That's not someone you can listen to. It's an interesting logic to undermine his shita. The logic was that we're not saying his content is right or wrong. We're saying he's not nice to Rabbanim, so his shita is out. I wonder how that plays out in Bezdin.
She might have mentioned all over shots.
Who's not Rav Simloi?
What?
Is Rav Simloi?
It's Rebbe Simloi on the 7th line down, yeah. There's always possible that there's more than one, but I would have expected Rashi to say this one's not like the others, if that was true. Yeah. So anyways, Rav tries to argue from the position of Rav Simloi is not one to have an opinion. Amar Le Shmuel says back to Rav, Ashlachle, do you want me to let him know that you feel that way about him? And Rav was ichsif, Rav was embarrassed. Amar Rav, okay, let's do this a different way. I'm not going to invalidate based on the content of his character, but rather, Amar Rav, imheim lo darshu, anan lo darshin, and the fact that they didn't learn the pasuk the right way doesn't mean we shouldn't learn the pasuk the right way. V'haksiv, last of the short lines. The pasuk says in Sefer Daniel, Vayosim Daniel al libo. Daniel put something on his heart. What was that? Asher lo yizgoel bepas bag hamelech uviyayin mishtav. He's not going to make himself vile with the bread of the king and with the wine of the drinks. B'shtei mishtavos hakasu medaber. Echad mishte yayin ve'echad mishte shemen. This is how we understand the pasuk in its basic form. And on this pasuk, there's a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel, because if this pasuk is correct that there's an iser of shemen, so then we see where it comes from, according to Rav, from Sefer Daniel. Let's see what Rav says. Rav says on the second of the wide lines, Rav Savar Ali Bosam Ulachol Yisrael Hora. It wasn't just a chumrah for himself. He was also Mora this halacha. He taught this as a regular din. Daniel held this way in Sefer Daniel, state and pasuk. That should be a very clear ma'amakum for Rav. Ushmuel Savar Ali Bosam Ulachol Yisrael Lohora. This we see all the time, that Rabbanim hold chumras for themselves. Herschel Schechter won't drink milk, but he doesn't paskin that way for other people. Fine. So that was their machlokas. So Rav says, what are you talking about, Shmuel? How do you read the pasuk? It's obvious that there are multiple liquids that Daniel held were usher. One's wine. What's the other one? It's got to be oil. And Shmuel says, yeah, that's fine that he held that way for himself about shemen akum, but it was a chumrah. He only held it for himself. Asks the Gemara on Rav, B'shemen Daniel Gozar? Is it correct to say that he was the one who was Gozer? V'ha'amar Bali, Amar Avimi, Nota'a, Mishmei Derav, that we have a statement from this long list of people, a Gemara and Shabbos, Piton, their bread, Ushmanon, their oil, Yenon, their wine, Uvno Sehen, and their daughters. Kulan, Mishmon Asar Davarhain. All of them are from the list of 18. Says Rashi, Shmona Asar Davar, Beis Shammai uVeis Hillel Yachad Nimnu v'Gazru Aleim bePerakama Deshamas Ulekam and Parach Beno Sehen Deoraisahi. What do you mean that the Gemara in Shabbos said that we can't marry their daughters? What does that even mean? We'll discuss that in a little bit. But anyways, the point is that what do we see over here? That it wasn't Daniel. This is from like Talmudic times that we're able to see that there was a restriction on oil. We see Ushmanon is right here. V'chitema asa Daniel gazar v'lo kibel, that Daniel made Gzera and the people didn't accept it. And then v'asu talmidei de Hillel v'Shammai v'gazar v'kibel im kain mai as hadusei derab. If what you're saying is true, that Daniel said it and they didn't listen, and then Hillel and Shammai came along and they did, but then what is Rav saying at the beginning of our Gemara on that very bottom line of Lamed Hamid Beis, where he says, Rav Amar Daniel gazar alav? Manavshach. Says the Gemara, Ella, here's what must have happened, 2/3 of the way down. Ella Daniel gazer alav be'ir. Daniel's restriction was only in the city. Why would Daniel only have a restriction in the city? Same principle that we learned by bread. Mishum chasnus, that's where you see people. And then Shammai and Hillel came along and they added a second layer of restriction of shemen, shel akum, when they were out in the field. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, how could it be that Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya is going to come along and undo the takanos of Shammai and Hillel? After all, Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya was an Amora. And the Hatnan, Ein Bezin Yachol Avatal Divre Bezin Chaveru, Elim Ken Gadol Haimenu B'Chachmu V'Minyan. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya doesn't have the power to undo the Gzera that the Chachamim put into place, because his Bezdin is not Gadol B'Chachmu V'Minyan. The Odin, furthermore, even if you want to say a more lenient shita, that one bezdin can always nullify that which another bezdin says, but even according to that lenient opinion, it's still chutz mishmona sardavar shafilu yavel yovezino and shamalo. These 18 are always going to be in place. Why? Because it's the only time Shammai and Hillel ever agreed on anything. And they were Bishalom for a short period of time. At that time in history, Beis Shammai was a larger group by volume than Beis Hillel, short stint, and they worked Bishalom of Bishalva, and these were the 18 Gzeras that they made. So no matter what, even the lenient opinion who says that we don't need a bezdin that's got a b'chachmu, even according to that, but by the 18 we don't have any leniencies. So therefore, how could it be that Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya would undo the gzeira of Hillel and Shammai that Shimonon shel akum are now mutter b'sadeh? So the Gemara says, Amar of Mesharshia matam ho'elu pashat yisura barov Yisrael. When in general, what we're concerned about is when there is an isser that all the Jews take upon themselves. But shemen lo pashad isur b'rov Yisrael. How do we know that to be true? That most Jews don't or didn't at that time, still don't. We have no concerns about oil, none. I don't think we have ever. There's any application of that. I don't think they even. I guess Lieber's does make an oil, but Lamaisa, most of us shop in the baking section when we buy oil. So says the Gemara, what do we know about the oil? The Amar of Shmuel bar Abba, Amar of Yochanan, Yashvu Rabbeinu Badku al Shemen, Shelo Pashad Yisrael Rov Yisrael. The rabbis sat down and they noticed that the Jews were not being makbid They weren't criticizing. They were just noticing that the Jews weren't being makbid on Shimon on Shel Akum. V'samchu Rabbeinu al divrei Reb Shimon ben Gamliel v'al divrei Reb Elazar bar Tzadok. Shayu omrim ein goes gzer latzibur elm ken rov hatzibur yicholon lamod ba. We're not going to institute something that the people aren't going to keep. The Jews knew that there was a principle of Shimon and Shel Ovdei Kochavim, and they weren't keeping it. So it was begeder davar she'ein hatzibur yachol lamod ba, and therefore we're not allowed to go back and start instituting these gzeros. It's just not going to work. Damar of Ada bar Abba Mikra. What is the support for this idea? Turning to the top of Lamed Vav Amid Beis. We'll see how far we get. Hopefully, we'll get toward the bottom of Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph. Says the Gemara. The pasuk says in Maseches Malachi, "Ba'me'era atem ne'arim ve'osi atem kovi'im hagoy kulo." And without going into the depths of the pasuk, "Ika goy kulo in." If the most of the people can keep it, if most of the tzibur can do it, then yes, we'll have a gzeira. And ilo lo. End of sugya. That's our sugya in regards to shemen. Seems a little bit. It's not so clear in the Psak land. It seems a little bit by the end of the Gemara that it's just not ein tzibur yochol lamod ba. Yeah. Today we have a very different culture because we have. I mean, our stores are malay v'gadush. We don't run out of food that frequently, so. It's a little hard for me to hear a difference between that and bread, in bread. But Lamaisa, today, we don't really have it.
Short of most of states. And therefore, there was errors on certain things that a person just could not be without.
The OU has issued a hechsher on north of 1 million products. It's an astronomical number. No. The CRC is number 5. And between that is star K, Chaf K, and OK.
And what?
Star K, Chaf K, and OK. Those are the top 5. The OU, I don't know what the order of the middle 3 are. Right. And they don't, and most items don't overlap. There are some items that have multiple hechsherim, certainly if you're going Haimish, but they do like Haimish and OU. They won't do like OU and CRC. That you don't see. Okay. Let's talk about the weird part of the Gemara that we saw, which is that it seems that the Gemara in Shabbos forbade us from marrying non-Jewish women, which was a little bit weird because it said Ben Osehem was one of the restrictions. You look like you have a question.
Discussed how when that day happened, it was like as bad as the Mikdash being destroyed. Doesn't the Gemara there say that?
Shabbos?
Yeah, am I wrong?
Do you know how long ago we learned Maseches Shabbos? I have no idea.
Most of it, I think.
Yeah.
That taka we learned on Zoom.
COVID year.
Because we wanted to have our siyum on brachos. We scheduled the dinner that Friday night. And we scrapped it last minute. And then we probably still had daf a few more days. And then most of Shabbos we did on Zoom from my dining room. Shabbos we did, remember the blackout? Were you here for the blackout? It was in it was Maseches Shabbos. The siyum was not. The siyum was in the social hall by candlelight. We gave out tea lights. People used their phones. Yeah. My people will call your people. I think we'll just do a double siyum at the end of Avodah Zara and let's do it together. Although somebody wanted to do one during the 9 days. It's not a big deal.
Don't want the milchik meal afterwards.
No, you don't need a milchik meal if you do a siyum. Yeah, it doesn't feel right. Okay, Gufa, let's continue learning. Top of Lav and Vav and Beis, 3 lines out. Amar Bali Amar Avimi Nota Mishmei Derav Pitan Ushmonan Yenan Uvnosein Kulan Mishmona Asar Davarhain. What in the world could Hillel and Shammai possibly have meant by Benosehin? Benosehin Maihi. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak Gazra Benosein Nidos Me'arisosa, that we treat the average non-Jewish woman as a nida from the cradle, from the crib, even though they don't menstruate at that age. And probably they didn't have a discharge that would be shaveh to make them a nida. We treat them that way. Ugniva mishmei derav amar kulan mishum avodas kochavim gazru bahen. We treat them as though they were involved in some kind of avodas kochavim. So says the Gemara that we treat them that whenever they would do anything, they were gazra al pitan mishum shmanan. There was a gzera about them having made bread because of oil. My ulme deshem and mipas. Why are we saying that the bread is dependent on the oil? Ella al pitan ushmanan mishum yenan. Both of them were actually because of wine. The al yenan mishum benosehen. And the wine is because we were concerned about their daughters, because we didn't want them to marry them. The al benosein mishum davar acher. The al davar acher mishum davar acher. As if we're going to stay vague enough, right? So we'll have to see what these terminologies actually mean. And we'll get into that in a couple of minutes. So says the Gemara, B'nosehen de oraisahi. What are you talking about? The status of, you just said that we're concerned about the pas and the oil and the wine because of chasnus. But that's not Gzeira D'Rabbanan. Meaning the reason why we're concerned about the daughters is because of chasnus, is marriage. But that is b'nosehen, that marrying their daughters is deoraisa. D'chsiv lo sischatein bam. So we're going to read this Gemara, but I just want to be clear, this is the Havamina and not the way we pass it. So the Gemara says, a third of the way down, when do we say the Isra of lo sischatein bam applies? The Oraisa is only Zayin Umos. The categorical Isra Doraisa of lo sischatein bam to marry a goy, a shikza, is Zayin Umos. Aval shari ovdei kochavim lo. But the categorical isser of marrying out doesn't apply to a stam oved kochavim. V'asa inhu v'gazer afilu d'sha'ar ovdei kochavim. An unbelievable shita, an unbelievable havamin, I should say, because it's not really a shita. But that is what the Gemara suggests as a possibility. Well, the Reb Shimon, it is. It's quoted over here on the side. Ki v'yecha Hashem elokecha el ha'aretz asher atava shama l'rishta v'nashal goyim rabim mipanecha hachiti v'hagir bashi. So the pasuk does say that, but we don't always learn psukim that way, right? But the Gemara accepts that as right now. The Gemara is accepting that pasuk is about Zaina. It's not crazy. It's not crazy, and the Gemara says that might be the marimakum for the Isser Dorais of the Zayin Amimin. But let's read the next shita. Well, the Reb Shimon ben Yochai the Amar ki yasir as bincha me'acharai l'rabos hamesiros. Even if you want to say there's a shita that the Isser Dorais of Los Yischatein Bam only applies to the Zayin Amimin, but according to Reb Shimon ben Yochai, the pasuk of Ki Yasir as Bincha Me'acharai is an Isser to marry anyone who is part of Mesiros, part of anyone who draws you away from Yiddishkeit. So you want to marry someone who's a Shiksameidl, that's an Isser Dorais. I don't care what they're from, doesn't matter. Ella, you're right. Deoraisa is ishus derech chasnus. Maybe, perhaps, the only isur deoraisa is actual marriage, even though the mechanics of marriage by a goy are not so real. There's no kedushin by a goy. But the isur deoraisa, says the Gemara, is ishus derech chasnus, is getting married in a way that people get married. You have a wedding, you have a wedding dress, you have a tuxedo. That is the Isra D'Oraisa. V'asa inhu gazra afilu derech znos. And they held that no, of course that's an Isra D'Oraisa to marry them, but the Isra D'Rabbanan that they layered on top, this Gemara from Maseches Shabbos, was that there is an Isra D'Rabbanan to be with them even derech znos. Says the Gemara, Znos Nami. We already knew about that Isser before they came along, before the Gemara and Shabbos. B'veisino shel Shem Gazru. That's from back in the day from Shem ve'ever. Tichsiv, the pasuk says, Vayomer Yehuda hotziu av Sisarev. So there, what do we see by Tamar? Zansa Tamar kalasecha. Was she married? No. What did Yehuda think when he slept with her? That she was a zona. He didn't. It wasn't Zayin Amimin. And then, nevertheless, there was a consequence. Ella, now we have to re-understand the Gemara. Ella deoraisa, oved kochavim haba al bas Yisrael demashcha basra. According to the Torah, the Isser deoraisa is for a non-Jewish male to sleep with a Jewish female, demashcha basra, because he will be able to sway her to join his religion. Aval Yisrael haba al haovedes kochavim. But if a man sleeps with a non-Jewish woman, that's different. Lo, perhaps that isn't an Isser deoraisa, because he will not be as swayed. And maybe the Gemara in Shabbos, when it said b'nosehan, was adding in that even if a Jewish man were to cohabit with a non-Jewish ovedes kochavim, that too would be aser midrabanan. So then the Gemara says that can't be, because Yisrael haba al haovedes kochavim halacha l'moshe misinahi. We know that for a man who is a Jew to sleep with an ovedes kochavim is a halacha l'moshe misinai. You don't need a pasuk, straight up aser. Da'amar mar habo el aramis kenoim pogim bo. That's Pinchas. That's this week's parsha, this past week's parsha. That's what the Gemara says over here, that perhaps we already know that there is this principle that a Jewish male is not allowed to sleep with a non-Jewish female, and therefore it can't be an Isser Derabanan. So then says the Gemara, Deoraisa Bifarhesia Uchemaisa Shahaya. When do we say it's an Isser Deoraisa for Yisrael to sleep with an Ovedes Kochavim? That's when it's done Bifarhesia, and like the story of Kozbi Vastur, right? That was mamish not right. The Asa'inhu, the Gemara in Shabbos, the Chachamim there, they were Gazer Afilu B'tzinam. They added in, of course, you should not behave like Kozbi Bastur did in Zimri ben Salah. That's an Isser Daraisa. It's Chilul Hashem 1,000,000,000 times over, plus the Isser itself. The whole thing was horrible. That's for sure. And the Chachamim came along and said, no, it's also Asr B'tzina. Then says the Gemara, B'tzina Nami, Bezdino Shel Chashmonai Gazer. That Isser of being cohabiting in private quarters with for Yisrael to cohabit with a non-Jewish woman, that the Bezdin of Chashmonai said, Yisrael Habala Ovedes Kochavim Chai B'Shum Nashka. Nashka is Nida, Shifcha, Goy, and Eshes Ish. So they held that these were the various isurim that were applied over here. You can take a look at Rashi, which speaks about this at greater length. And Kiyasa Ravin Amar Mishum Nashgaz. He says, I'm not talking about a regular case. I'm talking about a kohen, and the zayin is a zona. We're not talking about a regular case of Eshes Ish. Whatever the case may be, Bezdin Shel Chashmonaim were the ones who came up with this gzeira. It wasn't the Gemara in Shabbos. And Ki Gazru Bezdin Shel Chashmonai Bia. Maybe perhaps the only Isser that the Bezdin Shel Chashmonai put into place was Tashmish Shamita. Aval Yichud Lo. Perhaps there was not yet an Isser Yichud. V'asa inhu Gazer Afilu Yichud. And perhaps there would be an Isser Yichud that was instituted by the Brisa from Maseches Shabbos. Says the Gemara, no. Yichud Nami Bezdino Shel David Gazer. We know that being alone with a guy is still Asr because of the Bezdin of David HaMelech. Damar of Yehuda Bosa Shah Gazer al Yichud. At that time, there was a gzeira that they couldn't be alone with women. So says the Gemara, Amre Hasam Yichud Bas Yisrael. Maybe the Bezdin Shel David was only gozer about a Jewish man being alone with a Jewish woman. Aval Yichud Ovedes Kochavim Lo. But perhaps the gzeira of David and his Bezdin was not about goyim. Va'asa inhu Gazer Afilu Yichud Avodas Kochavim. And perhaps the Isser of Yichud with a goy only comes from the Gemara and Shabbos and not from David HaMelech. Says the Gemara, no, because says Gemara, Yichud the Bas Yisrael De'oraisa. First of all, don't tell me that David HaMelech was gozer to be alone with a woman. That's not correct. That's an Isser De'oraisa. We've learned about Yichud before. Damar of Yochanan Mishur Shem ben Yotzadak Remez Yichud min Ator minayin Shnemar Ki Yisischa Achicha ben Imecha V'chi ben Aim Macy's ben Av Eno Macy's. You think that one will sway the other and not both, and the Av and the Ben, and the Aim and the Av, they're all going to do something wrong. That's not what the pasuk means. Ella ben misyachirim imo ve'in acher misyachirim kol ha'Torah. So we see that we already learned about our Isser D'Oraisa of Yichud. It's not an Isser D'Rabbanan from the Bezdin Shel David. So then the Gemara says 8-9 lines from the bottom of the page, Yichud D'Oraisa Be'eshes Ish. Perhaps what we should say is that when is there an Isser D'Oraisa to be alone with someone? That's for a man, a Jewish man, to be alone with a married Jewish woman. David, and David's gzeira wasn't on being alone with an Eshes Ish. That's a pasuk in Chumash. But rather, he was saying it's usher to be beyichud with a pnuya, with a single Jewish woman. Also, tell me the Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Gazer afilu yichud dovedes kochavim. And that's the conclusion, actually, of how we hold. So let's just review Besikum Advarim, because there's a lot of layers here. The Isser D'Oraisa for a Jewish man to be alone with a Jewish married woman is an Isser D'Oraisa. That's not allowed. It's Yichud D'Oraisa. Yichud D'Rabbanan, from the Bezdin of David HaMelech, is to be alone with a Pnuya. And Yichud with a Goy was from the Gemara and Shabbos. And that's how we learn those three layers. Jewish woman Eshes Ish is D'Oraisa, Jewish woman Pnuya is D'Rabbanan, Bezdin Shel David, and non-Jewish woman is an Isser D'Rabbanan based on the Gemara and Shabbos. Now, we had said earlier this weird language of my al davar acher mishum davar acher. This is much higher on the page where we saw this brisa. It's about 12 lines down. First around the line is benosein. So then it says we were concerned about the chasnus mishum davar acher and al davar acher mishum davar acher. So asks the Gemara, my al davar acher mishum davar acher. So it says the Gemara, Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak, Gazer al tinok oved kochavim sheitame beziva, that we treat the child of an oved kochavim, that they're tame beziva, which we know is a significant level of tuma, as though they had the discharge of the disease of being a zav or a zava. Shelo yehei tinok Yisrael ragil etzlo b'mishkav zachar, because as it relates to the boys, this was much more culturally normal at that time for there to be mishkav zachar even among children. So we don't want them to hang out together. So we told our sons the boys is of. You're not allowed to be whatever rules they put in, whatever the case may be. Damar Zara Tsar Gadol Hayalo Eitzel Rebasi. There were a lot of questions that were being posed to Ravasi. Ravasi Eitzel Rav Yochanan. He brought those questions to Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan Eitzel Rav Yanai. Rav Yanai Eitzel Rav Nasan ben Amram. Rav Nasan ben Amram Eitzel Rebbe. And this was the question that was being asked repeatedly. 4 lines from the bottom. At what age do we attribute the status of Zav to this baby, to this toddler, infant, whatever it is, who is an Oved Kochavim? Va'amar li ben Yomo. And Rebbe said it's one day. Uchshabasi Eitzel Reb Chia. Reb Chia said something else. Amar li ben Teshon of Yom Echad. That's the day that a boy is considered Roy Lebia, that he's able to consummate. He's able to actually have Tashma Shamita. So what happened? Why did Rebbe respond to Reb Chia? Because Reb Chia had a different answer. Rebbe said it was from the time he was a baby, from when he's ben Yomo, and Rav Chia seemed to say no, that it was from the time he was 9 years and 1 day. And Uchshabasi v'yirtzesi devarai lifnei, or it should be divrei Rav Chia, whatever it is, lifnei Rabbi. Amarli hanach devarai ve'achos divrei Rav Chia. Damartino kovit kochav v'meimasai b'tamim b'ziva b'tisha yamim b'yom echad shanu b'yom echad. So there he said we should rely on that it's 9 years and 1 day when we assume that a boy is ra'ui l'bia. Turning to the top of Lamed Zayin and Aleph, the Gemara express. No. Rav Chia was the Rebbe of Rav, and I think an uncle of Rav.
So he was really just.
They were alive at the same time. Yeah.
I'm thinking of Chia about Rob.
Well, so that's
The Rebbe Chia is somebody else.
Yeah, there's different. Yeah, this one is Talmud. I think he was a Rebbe of Rav. Was he a Talmud also Rebbe? I don't know. Maybe.
Rob was the Talmud of Rebbe to some extent, so.
Right. Correct.
Okay. Sorry.
No, it's good. So the Gemara then says at the top of this page, and why did we pick the age of 9 years and 1 day to give this boy the status of Ziva? Because he's not Roy Labia until that time. So we're not concerned about him being a Mishkav Zachar Nick when he's 5 years old. He's not Roy Labia. We have to wait until he's older. So that's when we treat him to be like a Zav. So then our boys shouldn't hang out with their boys. So if that's true, then we should look at the same measure for a girl. Maybe we should treat a girl that she's matama beziva from the time that she's ru'uya labia. When is that? From the age of 3 years and 1 day, because we assume that after that point, if she has tashma shemita, that the basulim don't grow back. So what is true of a boy when he's 9 years and 1 day is true of a girl when she is 3 years and 1 day, which is that this is now called Tashma Shamita. Says the Gemara Pshita. Of course, that should be clear. Says the Gemara, no. Mao detema hai yada li ergule, v'hai lo yada li ergule kamash malan. No, I might have thought that when it comes to a boy who's 9 can already be mischievous, but a girl who's 3 is a baby. She's a toddler. And she can't create hergel around these misbehaviors. She's too young. Kamash malan, that we're still makbid, that we treat an Oved Kochavim from 9 years and up, that he is a Zav, and from the time that a girl who is an Ovedes Kochavim, from the time that she's 3 years and up, she's also treated like a Zava. Mistamech v'azal Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah Kadved Rav Simloi Shamin. Mistamech means he was leaning on. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah was leaning on the shoulder of Rav Simloi, his servant. I presume this is the same Rav Simloi from a blot ago. Amar le Simloi lo hayisa emesh beveis hamedrash k'shei tarnu as Hashemen. You weren't there when I removed the iser on Shemen. Amar lo bi'amenu tatir af hapas. We also were lenient on the bread. Amar lo im kain. We don't want to be in this category of Karalon Bezdin Asharya. We don't want people to say that we're the lenient Bezdin. We don't want that to be the case. Yeah, we'd rather be strict. It's not, after all. Hey, Rabbi Yossi ben Yoezer ish tzureda al kamsa dachan, on a particular type of grasshopper. Al mashke beis matbachaya dachan, that a certain liquid that was in the slaughterhouse was pure. Ve'al the karev lemisa misayev, and that there would be a status of tuma in regards to being close to a mace. The Rishonim are all over this. This one makes no sense. It's not a kula. It's a chumrah. We're not going to discuss that now. The karula, they changed his name to Yosef Sharia. Yosef, the one who makes everything. It's like, they used to say that about people in our community, that now they always give kulas, Anyways, Amar Le. No, it's not the same case. Hasam Sharat Talas. Over there, he was lenient on three things. Umar Sharachada. You were only lenient on one, which is the Shemen. So he says, Avishar Mar Chada Achrisi. Even if you were to be lenient on one more thing, it's still a Kati Tartin. It's still only two things with the Habi, and it's not three. So you're not as lenient as them. So they won't make fun of you. Amarle Anasharya Achrisi. I actually was lenient on another thing, so I don't have any more latitude. Mahi, what was he lenient on? And now we're going to jump back into Maseches Gittin for a while. Ditnan says Gemara Zeg Yitechim Lo Basi Mikan Ba'ad Shnei Masar Chodesh. Let's say that a man says to his wife, "Here's my get on whatever the month is, Aleph Kislev. If I don't come back in 12 months, and Meis Besoch Shnei Masar Chodesh ain't no get." So the Mishnah says that that's not a get. But Tani Allah, but the Chachamim said, "Rabosenu Hitiru Halinase." They allowed her to remarry without doing gibum and without doing chalitza. Ve'amrinan man Rabosenu. Whose shita was that? Amar Yehuda Mar Shmuel Beis Dina Deshar Mishcha. It's the same Bezdin that was lenient on the oil. Who was that? Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. So that's what he was concerned about. Savre. What was the reason that we said that we should be lenient for this woman? She got a get that said Zegitechim lo basi mikana shnei masar chodesh, and then her husband died. Savre la ki Rabbi Yossi damar zmano shel shtar mochiach alav. Look at the date on the shtar. So the husband died. He said he wasn't gonna, that if he doesn't come back, the get is gonna be chal. So we go back to the date on the shtar. The shtar said Aleph Kislev. So fine, the shtar says Aleph Kislev. Rabbi Abba Berei de Rav Chia Bar Abba Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Horev Lo Hodu Lo Kol Shaito. He didn't. Not everybody agreed to him. Ve'amre La Kol Siato. That even his inner circle of people didn't agree to him. Amar Le Rabbi Elazar Lahu Saba Ki Sharisuha. When we were lenient to say that this woman could remarry, La Altar Sharisuha Delo Asi O Dilma La Achar Shnei Masar Chodesh Daha Ikaim Le Tanaeha. We know he died. But let's say he died at the 6-month mark. Do we allow her to marry at the 6-month mark? Or do we have to wait until the 12 months? We know he died already. But the Tanai written in the get was Harei Zagitechim Lo Basim Mikan Ve'ad Yud Beis Chodesh. So do we, even though he's dead, we know he's dead, he's for sure not coming home, but do we need to fulfill the Tanai? You should be asking this question on the Mishnah itself. Have a get? We wait 12 months. So it seems over there, you should be asking the same question over there. You could have asked it on the Mishnah, or you could have asked it on the case that we just brought by Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. You could have done that. The reason why the question was asked on Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya was because the person asking was part of his bezdin. He was me'ahu minyana. He was part of the same bezdin, so they just kept the conversation. But the question is totally valid in regards to the Mishnah as well. And the Gemara speaks about this to try and answer the question. If someone makes a condition when the moon comes out of its pocket, obviously when the sun rises, then it's clear then that what that means is when the sun rises, whatever condition in the star kicks in. And if the person died at night and the sun had yet to rise, so then that's a get la'achar misa. So the man says, get la'achar, the sun should come up. And then he died at 3 a.m., so that's a get la'achar misa. That doesn't count. That's not a divorce. Almanas sheteitze chama min artika, not licha sheteitze when it comes out, but almanas sheteitze on condition that it will. Me'achshav kamar. That means that he really means right now. V'chimais b'lal yahavadai tana'a have, that condition is filled. V'get mechaim hu. Kid Rav Huna. This follows the sheet of Rav Huna. Da'amar Rav Huna kol omer almanas ka'omer me'achshav dami. We spent a long time on this sugya. A long time ago, that whenever somebody says almanas, it's like saying achshav. Lo nechlaku, the only time we have tension in our Gemara around the dinner of Yehuda Nasiya with the case of zegitechim lo basi mikan ba'ad shnei masar chodesh is in the following case. Ela be'im teitzei, if the sun will come out. Not lita sheteitze and not almanas, but im. If you use that language of Yehuda Nasiya savrla Rabbi Yossi damar zmano shel shtar mochiach alav, we just look at the date on the get. V'havala kamei yom im mesi kamei achshav im mesi. It's the same. We just look at the star and she can get married right away. The Rabbanon, the rabbis say lesay the Rabbi Yossi v'havala kizegitech im mesi greda, and therefore he held that you'd have to wait until 12 months. We'll stop right here at Gufa, and we'll analyze a little bit more about the interesting brisa about Yossi ben Yoezri Tzreda on Shabbos. Wishing you all a beautiful night.